That's where you belong. On the floor. The words slipped from Jasper's mouth like a dagger dipped in honey, sweet enough to charm the crowd, sharp enough to cut me to pieces. I had just fallen hard against the marble, the impact jolting through my bones, leaving my palms scraped and my pride bruised far worse. The polished floor reflected not only the glittering chandeliers above, but also the humiliation etched across my face. A ripple of laughter stirred among the guests, rising like a cruel tide, only to falter when they saw me struggling to rise. For a breathless moment, the grand ballroom seemed suspended in time. The violins still sang, but their notes trembled in the air, hollow and mocking. Champagne glasses gleamed under the golden light, but the sweetness of celebration had soured, leaving behind a metallic taste of shame. I felt dozens of eyes piercing through me, some filled with pity, some with discomfort, others eager to look away, as though witnessing my fall might stain the perfection of their evening gowns and tailored suits. Emily, my daughter, stood frozen near the head table. Her bouquet slipped from her hands, scattering white petals across the floor, like fragments of innocence shattered in an instant. Her lips quivered, her eyes wide with disbelief, but no sound came. That silence cut deeper than Jasper's cruelty. I pressed my hand against the table, forcing myself to stand, every movement heavy with age and memory. I had endured deserts and gunfire, the quiet nights of raising a daughter alone, the ache of loss that never fades. This was just another battlefield, and I would not let my dignity die here. What no one knew, not Jasper nor the glittering crowd, was that this single moment would unravel everything they believed and change the course of that wedding forever. I am Henry Alvarez, 58 years old, though in moments like that evening at the wedding I felt every year etched into the lines of my face. My hair had long turned grey, a colour my daughter liked to tease me about, calling it silver as if to make age sound noble. My hands bore the story of decades, skin roughened and scarred from turning wrenches in my small Brooklyn garage. When people looked at me, they did not see wealth or influence. They saw a man who smelled faintly of motor oil, who wore boots even at gatherings, and who carried himself with the quiet resilience of someone who had learned that life does not always give you choices, only duties. I had once worn a different uniform, one stitched with the flag of my country. In the deserts of the Middle East I had been a soldier, a mechanic turned warrior, and later a survivor. There were nights when I still woke, with the echoes of gunfire pounding in my ears, but over time I learned to fold those memories into silence. After my wife passed away, silence became my companion. It was Emily who pulled me out of that hollow place. She was only a girl then, no older than 10, with a voice soft as spring rain yet steady enough to remind me that I had something worth living for. Raising her alone became my mission, my war after the war. Every scraped knee, every homework assignment, every birthday candle blown out with her laughter was a small victory. I worked long hours repairing cars, so she would never feel the emptiness that comes with being less than others. Emily grew into a woman with eyes that carried both her mother's gentleness and my stubborn streak. At 25, she had already built a life for herself as an interior designer. She had the gift of seeing beauty in broken spaces, of turning faded walls into warm homes. I suppose that is why she believed in love so fiercely. She wanted to believe she could mend even the roughest edges, that hearts could be redesigned the way she transformed a room. I admired that faith, even if it sometimes frightened me. When she introduced Jasper Hale to me, I wanted to believe in him too. He was 30, dressed like the world belonged to him, carrying the confidence of a man who had never known hunger or doubt. He worked in finance, spoke with polished certainty, and had the kind of smile that convinced people he was destined for success. To Emily, he represented stability and charm. To me, he carried a sheen that felt too perfect, like chrome covering rust. Still, I tried. I shook his hand, listened to his stories of deals and numbers, nodded when he spoke of ambition. I told myself that a father's role was not to judge too harshly, but to support, to give his daughter the space to make her choices. Yet behind his smile I caught glimmers of something colder, a subtle disdain when I spoke of my work, a flicker of arrogance when he glanced at the grease on my knuckles. He wore expensive watches, but what I noticed most was the way he looked at Emily, not with tenderness, but with possession, as if she were a prize displayed in glass. The wedding was held in a Manhattan hotel ballroom, a place so lavish I felt like an intruder the moment I stepped inside. The ceilings arched high, painted with gold patterns that seemed to watch from above. Chandeliers dripped with crystals, scattering light that danced across polished champagne flutes. Waiters in black coats glided silently, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres I could not even pronounce. I wore my best suit, one that Emily had chosen for me, and though it fit well enough, I still felt like a man in borrowed skin. Yet none of that mattered when I saw Emily walking down the aisle. Her dress flowed like water, her smile radiant, her eyes shimmering with hope. In that moment I could almost believe that everything would be fine, that Jasper might truly love her the way she deserved. I tried to hold on to that belief, tried to silence the unease that whispered in the back of my mind. But unease has a way of finding its moment. When Jasper pulled away my chair at the reception, it was not only my body that hit the floor. It was the years of sacrifice, the dignity I had clung to, the respect I hoped he would grant me as the father of his bride. His cruel whisper was not just for me. It was a declaration to everyone present that I was beneath him, that my place was not among the wealthy and polished, but crawling on cold marble. I forced myself to rise. I forced myself to keep silent, though my chest burned with words I could not speak. The sight of Emily's trembling hands and tearful eyes held me back. I told myself that it was her day, and I would not be the storm that ruined it. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some had chuckled when I fell, thinking it a harmless prank, but when Jasper sneered at me, the laughter curdled into guilt. Still, no one spoke. No one stepped forward. Their silence pressed down heavier than the weight of the fall. I thought perhaps it would end there. I could endure one humiliation for the sake of peace. But arrogance, I would soon learn, does not stop at one act. It feeds on itself, grows bold with every unchallenged cruelty. That evening was not only Emily's wedding, it was the opening move in a battle I had not chosen but could not avoid. I remember gripping the stem of my glass, watching the bubbles rise like tiny ghosts, and telling myself that I had survived worse. I remembered the sound of helicopters slicing through desert skies, the metallic scent of sand and gunpowder, the faces of men I carried on my back while bullets cracked the air. Compared to that, one arrogant son-in-law was nothing. But as I looked at Emily, as I saw the shadow crossing her smile, I knew this battle was not mine alone, it was hers, and if I remained silent, she would be the one paying the price for my restraint. So I stayed still, outwardly calm, but inside I was waiting, listening, bracing myself. Because deep down I knew Jasper would not stop here. Men like him never do. The laughter that followed my fall eventually died out, but the echo of it clung to me like a bitter perfume that refuses to fade. I returned to my chair slowly, moving as though I carried the weight of the entire room on my shoulders. Every step back to that seat felt like a march through mud, heavy and suffocating. My heart hammered against my chest, not only from the sting of humiliation, but from the sheer effort it took to restrain myself. Years of discipline had taught me how to stay calm under pressure, how to bury anger deep inside, and let silence speak instead of fists. But there is a special kind of pain that comes when the insult is thrown not only at you, but also at the love you represent. Jasper had not simply pulled away a chair. He had tried to pull away the respect that belonged to me as Emily's father. I looked at my daughter, and the sight of her nearly broke me. Emily stood stiff, her bouquet already forgotten on the floor, her hands trembling at her sides, her lips pressed together as though holding back words, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She looked at me with helplessness, torn between the joy she wanted for this day and the shame that Jasper had just forced upon her. I longed to tell her that I was fine, that the man she called father was stronger than any insult, that I had walked through deserts under gunfire and carried men heavier than myself to safety, that a single cruel joke could not topple me. Yet in that moment I could not find the words. My silence felt louder than any speech. Jasper, however, thrived on silence. He leaned back in his chair at the dinner table, his fingers tapping against the glass, as though he were keeping rhythm with his own arrogance. He smiled at the guests, as if inviting them to share in the joke, and then looked straight at me. "You really are just a simple man, aren't you, Henry?" His voice carried across the table, polished but dripping with contempt. "A mechanic, spending your life with grease under your fingernails, while the rest of us build empires with numbers and wealth." The room stiffened. Forks paused midway to mouths. Conversations faltered. Eyes flickered between us. I saw embarrassment flash across Emily's face. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks stained red. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I lifted my glass of water slowly, the reflection of the chandelier shimmering on its surface, and said in an even voice, "A man's work never makes him small. His character does." A hush spread across the table. Some guests nodded faintly, others looked away, and Jasper laughed. It was not the laughter of amusement, but the hollow sound of someone refusing to lose face. He leaned back, still wearing that brittle smile, and though the moment passed, I knew he was not done. Dinner dragged on, and though the food was prepared by chefs of renown, I could hardly taste a bite. Each course felt like sand in my mouth, every toast like an insult aimed in my direction. When the plates were cleared, a waiter quietly placed the bill on the table. Jasper picked it up, glanced at the number, and smirked. Then, with deliberate slowness, he slid it across the table until it rested in front of me. "Tradition says the bride's father pays," he said. I stared at the bill. The number written in elegant ink glared at me, $347. For a man like Jasper, it was nothing more than the cost of a tie. For me, it was the money I set aside each week to keep the garage running, to pay rent on my modest apartment, to buy groceries that would last until the next paycheck. My throat tightened. Emily looked at me with pleading eyes, whispering, "Jasper, please, it isn't necessary." But he only crossed his arms, leaning back as if to say this was a test, and everyone was watching to see if I would pass or fail. I pulled my wallet from my pocket and counted the bills carefully, each one feeling heavier than steel. I placed them on the tray and pushed it toward the waiter without a word. My pride bled with every dollar, but my gaze never left Jasper's. I wanted him to see that while money could humiliate me in front of strangers, it could never buy my soul. That night, long after the ballroom had emptied and the city had quieted into the hum of traffic and distant horns, I heard a pounding on my apartment door. It was nearly midnight. I opened it to find Jasper standing in the hallway, his shirt collar loosened, his breath heavy with alcohol. His eyes burned with a fury that seemed out of place on such a night. He shoved a finger against my chest and hissed, "Call Emily. Tell her you're sorry for disrespecting me. Tell her you were wrong." I stood in the doorway, my body filling the frame, keeping him out. My voice was low but firm when I answered, "Number." His face twisted with rage. He leaned close, his words a venomous whisper, "Do it or lose her forever." Then he turned abruptly and stormed down the hall, his footsteps echoing like drumbeats of war. I watched him go, a sickness settling in my stomach. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the neighborhood and beyond. Friends and acquaintances approached me with uneasy looks, telling me what they had heard. Jasper had been boasting in his circles that Emily was not a wife, but an acquisition. He called her an investment, a trophy that proved his success. He spoke of her as if she were a stock he had purchased, not a woman he had promised to love. Each story struck me like a bullet, sharp and unrelenting. Emily, the girl who had grown up believing in kindness and trust, was now being spoken of like a possession. I wanted to protect her, to march into Jasper's office and strip away the mask of charm he wore, to shout until the whole world knew what kind of man he really was. But I held myself back. A father must sometimes fight, but he must also know when silence serves better than anger. Emily had to see the truth for herself. If I forced it too soon, she might push me away, blind with the hope that he could change. My role was not to tear her world apart, but to be the place she could return when it finally crumbled on its own. Yet the fire in me grew with every passing day. I replayed the fall on the marble floor, the mocking smile, the demand at my door. I thought of the young soldiers I had once led, how arrogance on the battlefield cost lives. I thought of the way Emily's face had crumpled when she dropped her bouquet, her lips trembling with silence. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made to raise her, and how one man's pride threatened to undo the dignity I had tried so hard to give her. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that the worst was behind me, that Jasper had made his point and would be content. But arrogance never knows when to stop. It is a hunger that grows stronger the more it feeds, and by remaining silent, I had unknowingly given it room to grow. I sensed, deep in my bones, that this was only the beginning of a storm that would test not only me, but the bond between a father and his daughter. The weeks that followed the wedding were like walking through a minefield, every step filled with the possibility of detonation. Jasper's contempt no longer lingered in whispers, but grew bold, spilling into public view as though he believed humiliating me had become his sport. The first time I saw him after that night was at a dinner arranged by Emily. She had insisted we come together as family, hoping perhaps that love could smooth the edges of hostility. The restaurant was elegant, with white tablecloths and candles that flickered against mirrored walls. I arrived early, as I always do, because punctuality is a habit drilled into me from years in service. I sat quietly, sipping water, rehearsing patience in my mind, like a soldier checking his weapon before battle. When Jasper walked in, his presence filled the space with the same arrogance as before. He greeted Emily with a kiss on the cheek, his hand lingering on her arm, just long enough to show possession rather than affection. Then he turned to me, eyes glinting. "Evening, Henry," he said. "I hope the garage is still keeping you busy. Must be nice to live such a simple life, fixing other people's broken things." I felt the sting in his words, not because of what I do, but because of the way he said it, as if honest work was something shameful. I looked at Emily, who shifted uncomfortably, her fingers twisting the edge of her napkin. My answer came calm but steady. "Broken things have value, Jasper. They only need care to work again." The waiter brought menus and conversation stumbled along, though Jasper's sneer never left his face. He spoke of deals and markets, of friends who had bought vacation homes, of expensive wines, always weaving his successes into stories designed to cast shadows on me. I listened with quiet patience, but each word pressed heavier against Emily, who seemed to shrink under the weight of comparison. When the meal ended, Jasper picked up the leather-bound check with theatrical flair. He opened it slowly, studied the total, then smirked as if the moment had been staged. He pushed the bill across the table until it rested near my hand. "Tradition says the bride's father pays," he announced, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Emily's face flushed crimson. She whispered, "Jasper, please stop." But he leaned back, folding his arms with the satisfaction of a man delivering a punchline. I stared at the numbers, feeling the same heaviness I had felt at the wedding. $347. For him, a single evening's entertainment. For me, a sacrifice carved from long hours beneath the hood of cars, from grease and sweat and sore muscles. Slowly, deliberately, I placed the money on the tray. My pride bent under the weight. But I met Jasper's eyes with unwavering steadiness. He could take my money, but he could not take my dignity unless I surrendered it. Days later, a new confrontation came, not in the bright light of a restaurant, but in the quiet darkness of my own home. A pounding shook my apartment door near midnight, so loud I feared the neighbors would wake. I opened it to find Jasper, his face flushed with drink, his shirt rumpled. He shoved a finger against my chest and demanded, "Call Emily. Tell her you're sorry. Tell her you were wrong to disrespect me." His words slurred, but the threat beneath them was sharp. I stood firm, blocking the doorway with my body. "I will not," I said. My voice was low, steady, unshaken. His eyes narrowed. He leaned close enough for me to smell the bitterness of whiskey on his breath. "Do it, or lose her forever." Then he spun on his heel and stalked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing like drums of war, fading into the night. The following morning, I walked through the neighborhood to clear my head, only to be met with whispers. Men I had known for years avoided my gaze. Women exchanged glances heavy with pity. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but soon a friend told me the truth. Jasper had been boasting to anyone who would listen, saying Emily was not a wife but an acquisition, that marrying her was like closing a successful deal. He spoke of her beauty as one speaks of a possession, bragging that she elevated his image the way a fine car elevates a man's status. My stomach churned with rage. Emily, my daughter who believed so deeply in love, was being spoken of as property. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in my chair by the window, staring out at the city lights, flickering like restless souls. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made for Emily. The birthdays I worked late so she could have gifts, the nights I stayed awake helping with school projects, the days I went without so she could have more. Every act had been an offering of love, not because I sought thanks, but because it was my duty and my joy. To hear her reduced to a trophy shattered something inside me. I wanted to storm into Jasper's office, to tear down the walls of his pride, to shout the truth until his arrogance crumbled. Yet I held back. Emily still wore the glow of new love, still clung to the belief that marriage could mend flaws. If I attacked too soon, she might see me as the enemy, the bitter father, unwilling to let her grow. My role was not to fight for her, but to be her refuge when she discovered the truth herself. That is the burden of fatherhood, knowing when to wield the sword and when to wait with open arms. Still, the fire inside me grew hotter with each passing day. Every whisper I heard, every memory of Jasper's smirk, every glimpse of Emily's fading smile, was fuel. I thought I had endured humiliation at the wedding, that the worst had passed. But arrogance never sleeps. It waits, it festers, and it always returns hungrier than before. I sensed it then, with the certainty of a soldier who has walked into ambushes before. The real battle had only just begun. The more time passed, the clearer it became that Jasper's arrogance was not a passing flaw, but the very fabric of who he was. Every interaction carried a hidden dagger, every smile, a mask for contempt. Emily invited me to their apartment one Saturday afternoon, hoping perhaps that if we spent time together outside the pressures of the wedding or the formality of a restaurant, things might ease. I agreed because I would do anything for her, though deep inside I knew peace with a man like Jasper was an illusion. Their apartment was high above the city, glass walls opening to a view of Manhattan's skyline stretching endlessly, a palace in the clouds compared to my modest home in Brooklyn. Emily moved about the space with warmth, arranging snacks, setting out drinks, doing everything she could to create comfort. Jasper lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone, barely lifting his eyes when I entered. At first the conversation was civil, Emily speaking brightly about her work, showing me sketches of her latest designs, the joy in her voice reminding me of the little girl who once covered her bedroom walls with drawings. But Jasper interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "It is cute, isn't it, Henry? How she decorates rooms and calls it a career. Real success is measured in numbers, not colors." Emily's smile faltered, and she looked down, pretending to adjust the papers in her hands. I clenched my jaw but answered softly, "Success is measured in the happiness it brings. If her work fills homes with comfort, then she is already successful." Jasper laughed, a sharp sound that echoed against the glass. He shook his head, as if my words were foolish, and turned back to his phone, dismissing me entirely. Later that evening, when dinner was finished and Emily was in the kitchen tidying, Jasper leaned closer to me, his voice low, but his eyes daring. "You need to understand something, old man. She is mine now. Whatever life you built for her, whatever sacrifices you think matter, they mean nothing compared to what I can give her. Do not forget your place." His words seared through me, each one a brand upon my soul. I wanted to strike him then, to show him that respect cannot be demanded by cruelty, but I swallowed my rage. I thought of Emily's fragile hope, the way she looked at him as though love might change him, and I forced myself into silence. But silence did not stop the storm. Not long after, rumors reached me again. Jasper had been bragging at his office about controlling Emily, about how marriage was just another transaction. He described her as though she were an asset in his portfolio, boasting that he had acquired beauty to match his wealth. My fists tightened when I heard these things, my chest burning with fury. I wanted to shout the truth to Emily, to shake her and make her see the man he really was. Yet I remembered the nights when she was small, when she crawled into my bed after a nightmare and asked me if everything would be all right. I had always told her yes, and I realized that now, more than ever, I had to be her shelter. She would need to discover the truth herself, and when she did, she would need me steady, not explosive. One evening, after closing the garage, I walked past a corner bar where veterans sometimes gathered. I stepped inside, craving the company of old voices. To my surprise, I found Sam, a man I had once served with overseas, now working as a lawyer. We shared a drink, and as we spoke of old times, I mentioned Jasper. Sam's expression darkened. He leaned closer and said quietly, "Henry, that man is trouble. His firm has covered up shady dealings, and his arrogance is going to catch up with him sooner or later." His words sank into me like stones. They confirmed what my instincts had screamed since the first day. Meanwhile, Emily began to falter under the weight of her marriage. One evening, she came to my apartment, her eyes swollen from crying. She collapsed into my arms and whispered, "Dad, what if I made a mistake?" My heart broke hearing the tremor in her voice. I held her close, stroking her hair the way I had when she was a child. I wanted to tell her to leave him, to walk away before he destroyed more of her spirit. But I bit back the words. Instead I said, "Mistakes are not the end of the road, Emily. They are signs that you still have choices. You are never trapped." The days that followed grew heavier. Jasper's cruelty became more visible, his insults less hidden. At another gathering with friends, he spoke loudly about my work, as if it were a joke. "Imagine spending your whole life fixing cars," he said, raising his glass, "while the rest of us build fortunes." Some laughed weakly, others avoided my gaze, but Emily looked devastated. I sat there quietly, letting his words wash over me, though inside I burned. I had carried men through deserts, faced nights filled with fear and loss, raised a daughter alone against every hardship. For him to belittle that life was like spitting on the graves of the men I had served with and on the memory of my late wife. It became clear that Jasper's goal was not only to assert control over Emily, but also to crush my dignity, to erase me from her life. Every insult, every humiliation was a brick in the wall he tried to build between us. Yet what he did not understand was that the bond between a father and daughter is not built on wealth or pride. It is forged in the fires of sacrifice, in nights spent awake with worry, in years of choosing her happiness over your own. That bond is stronger than any wall arrogance can build. By then, I knew a reckoning was coming. It was no longer a matter of if but when. Jasper's cruelty had grown too bold, his arrogance too unrestrained. The storm he was feeding would soon consume him, and I, though weary, though scarred, though aged, would be there when the truth finally revealed itself. Because this was no longer just a battle of pride. It had become a fight for Emily's soul, for the life she deserved, for the dignity that neither she nor I could afford to lose. I often think back on those weeks as if they were storm clouds gathering on the horizon. At first they seemed distant, only a grey smear across an otherwise bright sky. But each day the clouds crept closer, their edges darkening, their weight pressing down on me until I could feel the storm humming in my bones. Jasper's arrogance had already chipped away at Emily's smile, and though she tried to hide it, I could see the way her shoulders slumped when no one was looking. A father learns to read the smallest signs, the way a soldier learns to hear the faintest rustle in the desert before danger strikes. One evening, after closing the garage, I found myself drawn to the corner bar, where a few old veterans often gathered. The place smelled of stale beer and fried food, its wooden floor worn from years of heavy boots. I wanted to sit among familiar voices, men who understood silence better than words. When I stepped inside, I saw a face I had not seen in decades. Sam, a fellow soldier from my days overseas, sat at the counter nursing a drink. His hair had thinned, his back bent with age, but his eyes still carried the sharpness of a man who had survived. We embraced like brothers who had once stood shoulder to shoulder in fire. We shared stories, laughed over memories of nights under foreign skies, and for a while it felt as if the years had melted away. Yet when I mentioned Jasper, when I told Sam about my daughter's husband, his expression shifted. The lines of his face hardened, and he leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Henry, I know that name. I've seen it in papers at the firm I work with now. Jasper Hale is tied up in things he should not be. His company covers for him because of the money he brings in. But I've heard whispers of fraud, of deals that skirt the law. The arrogance you see is not just personality. It is the shield of a man who knows he is standing on a shaky foundation." His words landed heavy in me. For years I had trusted my instincts, and every instinct about Jasper had screamed caution. Now Sam confirmed what my gut already knew. Jasper's empire was not built on stone but on sand. I left the bar that night with my mind racing. I walked the streets of Brooklyn, the cold wind biting at my cheeks, thinking of Emily. She was walking into a future that was not only loveless but dangerous. The very next day, as if the universe itself wanted to peel back Jasper's mask, another truth surfaced. Emily came to visit me in the garage. She sat on the old wooden stool where she used to perch as a little girl, swinging her legs while I worked. Her eyes were red from crying, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Dad," she said, "what if I made a mistake?" My heart clenched at the tremor in her words. I put down the wrench I was holding and wiped my hands on a rag, then knelt beside her. She told me that Jasper's aunt, Nancy, had spoken to her in confidence. Nancy had seen Jasper grow up, had watched his pride turn to cruelty, had warned Emily that he had always been controlling and dismissive, especially of women. "He does not know love," Nancy had said. "He only knows power." Emily's tears spilled freely as she repeated those words to me. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing like the child she once was, whispering again and again, "What if I made a mistake?" I held her tightly, rocking her as I had when nightmares woke her in the middle of the night. My hand stroked her hair, and I said the only thing I could. "Mistakes are not the end of the road, Emily. They are crossroads. You still have the power to choose which way you will go." She clung to me, her tears soaking my shirt, and for the first time I felt the wall she had built to protect Jasper begin to crack. That evening, long after she left, I sat alone with memories pressing heavy against me. I remembered her mother's smile, the way she used to say that love builds rather than destroys. I remembered promises I had made at her grave, promises that I would protect Emily, that I would never let her feel abandoned. Now I faced a battle I had not chosen, but it was one I could not ignore. The following days grew even heavier. Rumors of Jasper's arrogance continued to reach me, each one a fresh wound. But now I carried Sam's warning in my mind, and Nancy's confession in my heart, and Emily's tears in my soul. The truth was surfacing, piece by piece, like bones rising from the earth after years of burial. When I saw Jasper again, it was at a formal dinner hosted by one of his business associates. Emily had asked me to come, perhaps hoping my presence might steady her. The room was filled with polished shoes and expensive cologne, men with loud laughter, and women with diamonds that caught the light. I felt out of place, a mechanic among magnates, but I held my head high. Jasper strutted through the evening like a peacock, tossing insults at me disguised as jokes, boasting of deals and wealth. Yet I noticed something different this time. Some of the guests did not laugh. They shifted uncomfortably, their eyes sliding away from him. The cracks in his mask were beginning to show, not only to me but to the world he tried so hard to impress. That night, as I walked home beneath the city's glow, I realized the turning point had come. Emily's faith was faltering. The whispers of family had reached her. The warnings of friends were echoing in her ears. And Jasper, blind in his pride, was too arrogant to see the walls of his empire crumbling. I knew then that this story was no longer only about humiliation. It was about revelation. The truth had begun to surface, and though it was painful, though it tore at Emily's heart, it was the kind of pain that heals once the wound is cleaned. What I did not yet know was how that truth would fully come to light. How one undeniable moment was waiting just beyond the horizon, a moment that would shatter Jasper's arrogance once and for all and bring dignity back to where it belonged. The wedding banquet was supposed to be a celebration, yet for me it became a battlefield dressed in silk and crystal. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, violins filled the air with melodies too delicate for the heaviness in my chest, and champagne flowed like golden rivers into crystal flutes. I sat among the guests, my back straight, my face calm, but inside I carried the tension of a soldier, bracing for the first shot. I had endured Jasper's insults, his arrogance, his threats, but I knew him well enough by now to sense he would not leave this night untouched. Emily tried to smile, moving gracefully among the tables, thanking guests, her gown trailing like a stream of light behind her. Yet I could see the weariness in her eyes, the way her smile faltered when she thought no one was looking. I wanted to hold her hand, to remind her she was not alone, but tonight was her night, and I refused to add weight to her burden. The meal had just been served when it happened again. I rose from my seat to greet an old acquaintance, and as I prepared to sit, Jasper stepped forward with the swiftness of a snake. He pulled the chair away once more, and I fell hard against the marble floor. The shock rippled through me, bones aching, pride wounded, the gasps of the crowd filling the hall like the sudden intake of breath before a storm. Some guests laughed nervously, unsure whether to treat it as humor or cruelty. But when Jasper bent over me, smirking, and said loudly enough for all to hear, "Looks like age is catching up with you, old man," the laughter died instantly. I pressed my palms against the cold stone, forcing myself to rise. My heart pounded, not from the fall, but from the fury I struggled to contain. Around me the guests whispered, their eyes darting between Jasper and me, their discomfort growing. Emily stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands, tears shimmering in her eyes. I thought of all the times I had shielded her as a child, of the nights I had whispered to her that everything would be all right. Tonight, she needed me to be strong once again, not with fists or anger, but with dignity. As I steadied myself, a sound cut through the silence, the echo of heavy boots striking marble. The room shifted, heads turned, and through the grand entrance walked a man I had not expected to see. He was older now, his hair grayer, his face lined with years, but I knew him instantly. Saul Hale, Jasper's father. He moved with the weight of authority, yet when his eyes fell upon me, they widened with recognition. He stopped dead in his tracks, his face paling. "Sergeant Alvarez," he whispered, his voice carrying across the stunned room. You saved my life in Iraq." The words struck like thunder. A hush fell over the hall. Guests turned to look at me, at him, at Jasper, whose smirk faltered into confusion. Saul took a step closer, his voice breaking with emotion. "That night, the ambush, we were pinned down, gunfire everywhere. I thought it was over, but you carried me through it. You dragged me across the desert while bullets tore the ground around us. You gave me another chance at life." The hall erupted in murmurs, disbelief turning quickly into awe. Some guests rose to their feet, others clasped their hands over their mouths. Emily's eyes filled with tears, not of shame this time, but of pride. She looked at me as though seeing her father in a new light, though it was a light I had carried all along. Jasper's face drained of color. He stumbled back, his arrogance cracking like glass under pressure. For the first time, the man who always stood tall with pride looked small. I straightened, my voice steady, each word carrying the weight of years. "You wanted me on the floor, Jasper, but men like me do not stay there. We rise, and when we rise, it is not to crush others, but to protect the ones we love." The hall fell into silence again, the kind of silence that holds reverence rather than discomfort. Then slowly, applause began. It started with Saul, clapping with tears in his eyes, then spread through the room until every guest stood, the sound echoing like thunder rolling through the marble hall. I stood quietly, humbled but unbroken. For the first time since the wedding began, I felt no shame, no anger, only a deep peace. The truth had found its moment, and in that moment Jasper's mask shattered completely. The applause thundered around me, yet in my chest there was only stillness. I looked at Emily, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. For years she had known me only as the father who fixed cars, who packed lunches, who worked late nights so she could dream freely. Now she saw another part of me, the soldier who had once carried men through fire, the man who had borne scars not for glory but for survival. Her eyes shone with pride, and for the first time in months I felt the weight of her disappointment lift. Jasper, however, could not bear the shift. His fists clenched, his jaw tightened, his arrogance struggling to hold the crumbling facade together. He stepped forward, his voice trembling though he tried to keep it sharp. So what if he saved a life years ago? That does not change what he is now. He is still just a mechanic, still a man stuck in the past while the rest of us move forward. His words fell flat, rejected by the crowd. No one laughed, no one nodded in agreement. The room had turned against him, the tide shifting in a way he could not control. Saul placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice ringing with sincerity. Henry Alvarez is more of a man than most will ever be. He showed courage when the world was chaos, and he carries humility now when lesser men would boast. If you cannot see the worth in that, Jasper, then it is not Henry who is blind. It is you. The guests murmured in agreement, some nodding, others glaring at Jasper with open disdain. Emily stepped forward then, her bouquet still trembling in her hands. She faced Jasper, her voice steady though her tears still fell. Love does not humiliate. Love builds, it protects, it heals. And what you have given me is not love. It is control, it is pride, it is cruelty. I thought I could change you. I thought love was enough to soften arrogance. But tonight I see the truth. She slipped the ring from her finger, the gold glinting under the chandeliers, and placed it on the table with a quiet finality that echoed louder than any shout. Jasper's mouth opened, but no words came. His face twisted, his eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but none came. He was alone in his arrogance, stripped bare before the very people he had sought to impress. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound sharp, desperate, but it only deepened the silence that followed. I stepped forward, standing beside Emily, my hand gently resting on her shoulder. My voice carried through the hall, calm yet resolute. A man's worth is not measured in wealth or titles. It is measured in how he treats those he loves, in the sacrifices he makes without asking for praise. Jasper wanted me on the floor, but tonight it is he who has fallen, and unlike me, I do not think he will rise. The guests erupted once more in applause, not of celebration, but of vindication. It was as if justice itself had walked through the door, reminding everyone that arrogance has a limit and dignity endures. Emily and I walked out of the hall hand in hand. The night air met us cool and gentle, the city lights flickering like stars scattered across the pavement. Emily leaned against me, her tears now quiet, her breathing steady. She whispered, "I should have listened sooner. But thank you, Dad, for being patient, for waiting until I could see the truth myself." I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close, my eyes lifting to the sky, where the faint glow of the moon shone through the clouds. Around my neck hung the gold chain with my late wife's ring, and as it chimed softly against my chest, I felt her blessing in the breeze. For the first time in a long while, peace filled me completely. I had not fought for revenge. I had not answered cruelty with cruelty. I had simply stood firm, held on to dignity, and trusted that truth would find its way. Behind us, the hall buzzed with voices, guests whispering of what they had witnessed, of the father who rose when insulted, of the soldier whose past came alive, of the daughter who found her strength. The story was no longer just mine. It would live in the memories of everyone who had seen arrogance fall and dignity stand. And as Emily and I walked into the night, I realized that the storm had passed. The battlefield was behind us, and though the scars remained, they were not marks of shame. They were proof of survival, of love, of the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. When the doors of the banquet hall closed behind us, the night seemed to breathe differently. The city, alive with its usual chorus of horns and voices, felt softer somehow, as if it too had witnessed the breaking of chains. Emily clutched my arm, her fingers cold but firm, her steps uncertain yet determined. We walked slowly into the cool evening, the echo of applause still lingering faintly in our ears, fading into the hum of Manhattan's restless streets. I glanced at her, my daughter who had just shattered the illusion of a marriage in front of an entire hall of witnesses. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but there was a steadiness in her eyes that I had not seen for weeks. She was trembling, but it was the trembling of someone stepping out of a storm, not the trembling of fear. I guided her toward the curb, hailed a cab, and we slid inside. For a few minutes we sat in silence, the city lights flashing across the windows, our reflections mingling with the blurred glow outside. Finally, Emily whispered, "Dad, I thought love meant patience, that if I gave enough of myself, he would change. I wanted so badly to believe that kindness could soften cruelty, but tonight I saw it clearly. Love does not demand humiliation. Love does not laugh when you fall. Love builds, it protects, it never tears you down." Her words cracked my heart open. I reached across the seat and held her hand, the same hand I had held when she was a little girl, learning to walk across a crowded playground. "You are right, Emily," I said softly. "Love is not pain dressed as devotion. Love is not control disguised as care. The love you deserve is the kind that makes you stronger, not weaker." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in months, I felt her truly relax against me. When we arrived at my apartment in Brooklyn, she followed me upstairs without hesitation. The small place smelled faintly of motor oil and coffee, the worn furniture carrying years of stories. Emily dropped her shoes by the door and curled up on the couch, tucking her knees beneath her dress. I brought her a blanket, the same one she had used during childhood movie nights, and draped it over her shoulders. She smiled faintly through her exhaustion, whispering, "It still smells like home." That night, she slept in her old bedroom, surrounded by photographs and trinkets she had left behind when she moved out. I sat by the window in the living room, watching the city lights flicker like restless stars, and I thought of my late wife. I reached for the chain around my neck, the ring that had belonged to her. I whispered into the silence, "She is safe now. She found her strength." The ring chimed softly against my chest, and in that moment I felt her presence, a quiet blessing carried on the night air. The days that followed were not easy. Emily faced the painful task of unraveling her marriage, confronting Jasper not in front of crowds, but in the privacy of lawyers' offices and courtrooms. Each meeting was a battle, but this time she was not alone. Sam, my old friend, offered his counsel as a lawyer, guiding Emily with both compassion and precision. Nancy, Jasper's aunt, stood as a witness, her quiet voice carrying the weight of truth that pierced through his denials. The whispers that once tormented us now became evidence, threads woven into a tapestry that revealed Jasper's arrogance for what it was. Through it all, I stood beside Emily. Some days she cried until her body shook, grieving not only the loss of a husband, but the shattering of the dream she had built. Other days she was fierce, her voice steady, her determination unshakable. I reminded her constantly that she was not broken, that mistakes do not define us, but rather teach us. I told her that strength is not in never falling, but in rising again with dignity. Slowly, piece by piece, her light returned. She began sketching again, her designs filling notebooks with colors and shapes that spoke of hope. She returned to her work, pouring her energy into transforming spaces into homes, and her clients noticed the difference. They saw not just an interior designer, but a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. Her projects grew, her reputation spread, and soon she was building a name that was entirely her own, untouched by Jasper's shadow. For me, life settled back into the rhythm of the garage, the hum of engines, and the smell of oil grounding me as it always had. Yet something had changed. When customers looked at me, they no longer saw only the mechanic. Some had heard the story of the wedding, of the father who stood in silence until the truth spoke for him. They treated me with a quiet respect, not because of medals or battles, but because of dignity. Still, I carried myself the same way I always had, humble and steady, because respect is not something to be flaunted, it is something to be lived. One evening, months later, Emily and I stood outside the garage after closing. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the air carrying the gentle warmth of early summer. She leaned against the wall, her arms folded, her smile soft. "You know, Dad," she said, "I used to think you were just ordinary, a man who fixed cars and kept to himself, but now I understand. Ordinary men can carry extraordinary strength. You taught me that dignity is not about what you own, but about how you live, and you showed me that silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the loudest truth of all." I looked at her, my chest swelling with pride. "You have always been stronger than you realize," I told her, "and one day you will find someone who sees that strength and cherishes it, not someone who fears it." She nodded, her eyes glistening, and in that moment I knew she had healed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I thought of the long road we had walked together, from scraped knees to broken hearts, from silent nights of grief to nights filled with laughter again. Life had knocked us down, but each time we rose, not by crushing others, but by holding on to each other. That is the legacy I wanted to leave her, not wealth or possessions, but the unshakable truth that dignity once held can never be taken away. When I look back on everything that happened, I no longer see the humiliation of falling on the marble floor, nor the sting of cruel laughter echoing in my ears. What I see instead is the way Emily's hand clung to mine when we walked out of that hall, the way her eyes slowly found their strength again, the way dignity, though tested, refused to bow. Life has a way of pushing us down, sometimes so suddenly that we cannot catch our breath. But what I learned that night, and what I hope you carry with you, is that dignity is not lost when we fall. It is only lost when we choose not to rise. A father may grow old, his back may bend, his hair may turn the color of ashes, his pockets may remain nearly empty, but in the eyes of his child, he is never small. A father's worth is not measured in money or in titles. It is measured in the sacrifices he makes, in the strength he gives silently, in the way he stands unshaken when storms try to break him. Emily saw me stumble, she saw me mocked, but she also saw me rise. And in rising, she found her own courage to rise as well. That is the legacy I wanted to leave her, and that is the lesson I want you to hold close. If you have ever been humiliated, if you have ever been told you are less, remember that your value does not depend on the words of the arrogant. Your value comes from the love you give, the resilience you carry, the quiet dignity that no one can strip away. The world may laugh when you fall, but true strength is shown when you stand again, not to strike back, but to protect what truly matters. I share this story because I know there are fathers, daughters, and sons out there who carry their own battles silently. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength or of the quiet sacrifices someone once made for you, I ask you to stay with me. Like this story, share it, and subscribe to the channel, because there are many more stories of fathers whose quiet love changes everything. Sometimes it takes only a single story to remind us that dignity, once protected, shines brighter than any chandelier in any hall.